Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Cole had seen 3 tours across the galaxy, fought aliens on 17 different worlds, and earned enough medals to sink a small ship. But none of that mattered now as he hung from the gallows in the center of New Byzantium's capital plaza. A billion alien eyes watching through holofeeds across the hegemony. The rope burned against his neck, coarse and deliberately uncomfortable. The Vorthak executioners had made sure of that. They wanted him to suffer, to squirm, to beg for mercy that would never come. Instead, Marcus stood straight, his dress blue uniform somehow still crisp despite 3 weeks of imprisonment and torture. His steel-gray eyes swept across the crowd of purple-skinned aliens below, their forearms gesticulating wildly as they cheered for his death. Any last words, human scum? The Vorthak High Executioner's voice translator crackled with static, turning his alien words into heavily accented English. His ceremonial robes glittered with precious stones taken from conquered worlds, each one representing a species crushed beneath hegemony rule. Marcus lifted his chin. Behind him, the massive screens broadcasting this spectacle to every corner of hegemony space flickered and hummed. Somewhere out there, he knew his fellow Marines were watching. His wife Sarah was probably crying in their small apartment on Earth. His daughter Jenny would be in school, hopefully shielded from this horror. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent plaza. "Tell your bosses that was a big mistake." The Vorthak crowd erupted in laughter, their translator unit struggling to keep up with the cacophony of alien voices mocking the doomed human. The High Executioner's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. "Pathetic human arrogance," the Executioner said, raising one of his forearms. "Your species will learn to kneel properly once they see what happens to those who dare strike hegemony soldiers." The lever mechanism was ancient by galactic standards, a deliberate choice by the hegemony. They preferred their executions to have a certain theatrical flair, especially when dealing with member species who showed signs of rebellion. The slow, mechanical nature of the gallows was meant to drive home their helplessness against hegemony might. Marcus thought about the events that had brought him here. The hegemony patrol that had cornered a group of human children outside the residential district on Kepler 442b, the Vorthak soldiers who had decided that human youngsters would make excellent target practice. The moment when Marcus had arrived with his squad to find 12-year-old Tommy Peterson bleeding out in the dust, clutching his younger sister's hand. What followed was 43 seconds of the most precise violence Marcus had ever delivered. 4 hegemony soldiers, each standing 8 feet tall and armed with energy weapons that could vaporize a human in an instant, had died before they could even draw their sidearms. Marcus's combat knife had found every weak point in their exoskeletons, every gap in their personal shields, every vulnerable nerve cluster that 18 years of fighting aliens had taught him to exploit. The children lived. Tommy would walk again. But Marcus had killed hegemony soldiers in full view of a dozen security cameras, and the Vorthak demanded what they called proportional justice for his crimes. The High Executioner's hand moved toward the lever. Across the galaxy, a billion beings watched through their various optical organs, waiting for the moment when humanity would lose one of its greatest warriors. The hegemony had been very careful to emphasize Marcus's military record in their broadcast. 17 worlds conquered, 43 species subdued, over 2,000 hegemony soldiers killed in direct combat. They wanted every human watching to understand that even their best could be broken, could be made to dance at the end of a rope for hegemony entertainment. Marcus closed his eyes and thought of home. Earth's blue skies and white clouds, the smell of Sarah's perfume, Jenny's laugh when he pushed her on the old tire swing behind their house, the taste of beer after a long deployment, the sound of reveille echoing across Camp Pendleton at dawn. The lever clicked. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the satisfying snap of breaking bones, the final twitch of another conquered species learning its place in the galactic order. The camera zoomed in on Marcus's face, ready to capture his final expression of pain and defeat. Instead, the rope snapped, not frayed, not stretched to breaking point, but cut clean through as if by an impossibly sharp blade. Marcus dropped 3 feet to the platform, landing in a combat crouch that any Marine would have recognized. His hands were free, the restraints falling away like tissue paper. The crowd's confusion lasted exactly 2 seconds before the first explosion lit up the horizon. Marcus stood slowly, his eyes now open and focused on something far beyond the plaza, far beyond New Byzantium, Far beyond the here and now, he looked like a man receiving a message, listening to whispers carried on solar winds across impossible distances. 50 seconds, he said quietly, his words somehow audible over the growing rumble of approaching engines. Took them 50 seconds. The high executioner stammered something in his native tongue, his forearms scrambling for the ceremonial weapon at his belt. Around the plaza, hegemony security forces were shouting orders, trying to establish what had gone wrong with their foolproof execution method. High above them, the first human warship punched through New Byzantium's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric entry. Then another, then a dozen more. Marcus looked directly into the nearest camera, knowing that his words were being broadcast to every world in the hegemony. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried the promise of absolute annihilation. "This was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Cole, United States Marine Corps," he said, "and my people don't leave anyone behind." The first kinetic strike turned the hegemony military complex into a crater of molten glass. The second wiped out their orbital defense platforms. By the time the third hit, the alien crowd was screaming and running for shelters that would not save them. Marcus remained standing on the gallows platform as chaos erupted around him, watching the systematic destruction of everything the Vorthak held dear. Somewhere out there, the greatest military force in human history was painting the galaxy red with alien blood, and it had taken them exactly 50 seconds to arrive after watching their brother's execution. The hegemony was about to learn why you never touch a Marine's family. The war for human freedom had begun. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, watching through the viewscreen as New Byzantium burned below them. The hegemony's most important administrative world was dying in real time, its purple skies now orange with the glow of 1,000 fires. Her fingers drummed against the command chair's armrest, a nervous habit she'd developed during her 20-year rise through the ranks. "Status report," she said, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge crew, managing the largest military operation in human history. "All targets eliminated on New Byzantium, Admiral," reported Commander Hayes, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Casualty estimates for hegemony military personnel approaching 90%. Civilian population centers remain untouched per your orders." Sarah nodded. The distinction mattered even in war, especially in war. Humanity would not become the monsters they were fighting against, no matter how justified their rage might be. "Fleet status? 147 ships now in system, ma'am. The Yamato battle group just dropped out of hyperspace at Grid 77. Admiral Nakamura reports ready for Phase 2 operations." Through the viewport, Sarah could see the running lights of human warships scattered across local space like angry stars. Each one represented years of secret construction, hidden shipyards built in the dark spaces between systems, resources diverted from civilian projects in preparation for this day. The day when humanity would remind the galaxy that Terrans did not forgive, and they sure as hell did not forget. "Communications. Patch me through to all fleet commanders. Authorization Omega 77. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of electronics and the distant rumble of the ship's engines. Sarah took a breath, knowing that her next words would echo through history. In the tactical display, she could see the positions of human fleets throughout hegemony space. Operation Righteous Fury was proceeding exactly as planned. "All commands, this is Admiral Chen aboard Retribution. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Cole has been secured and is receiving medical attention. I repeat, our Marine is safe." A cheer went up from her bridge crew, quickly stifled as training reasserted itself. "Phase 1 is complete. Commence Phase 2. Remember, we are not conquerors. We are liberators. Military targets only. Protect civilians where possible. Make them remember why they should have left us alone." The acknowledgments came back in rapid succession. Admiral Nakamura's Third Fleet was already engaging hegemony forces at Proxima Centauri B. The Fifth Fleet under Admiral Okafor was systematically dismantling defense platforms around Kepler 438. From Wolf 359 to Tau Ceti, human warships were emerging from hyperspace like avenging angels, catching hegemony forces completely off guard. Sarah turned to her intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Parks, whose face had gone pale as new data streamed across his display. "Sir, we're receiving reports from all sectors. The hegemony is. They're in full retreat. Complete chaos across their military hierarchy." "Elaborate." Parks swallowed hard. "Ma'am, they weren't prepared for this level of coordinated assault. Our intelligence networks report that Hegemony Command assumed humanity was too primitive to mount large-scale operations outside our home system. They positioned their forces accordingly." Sarah almost smiled at that. The Hegemony's arrogance had always been their weakness. They'd spent so long crushing primitive species with overwhelming force that they'd forgotten how dangerous a truly motivated enemy could be. Humans had been watching, learning, preparing for this moment since the first alien boot had stepped on Earth 50 years ago. "What's our timeline for full system control?" "At current pace, sir, we'll have eliminated organized hegemony resistance in their core systems within 72 hours. 72 hours. Sarah remembered the first day humans had encountered the hegemony. Their massive ships had appeared in Earth orbit like metal mountains, their broadcast simple and terrifying. Submit or be destroyed. Humanity had submitted, accepted vassal status, agreed to provide soldiers and resources to the hegemony's endless expansion. But humans, Sarah knew, were remarkably good at pretending to be defeated while secretly sharpening their knives. "Ma'am," the communications officer called out, "incoming transmission from the Hegemony High Council. Priority 1 frequency." "Put it through." The main screen flickered, replacing the view of burning New Byzantium with the image of High Counselor Vexitharan, his purple skin darker than usual with stress chemicals. His forearms gestured frantically as he spoke, the translation software, making his desperation clear even through the mechanical voice. "Admiral Chen of the human fleet, I demand an immediate ceasefire. Your actions constitute an illegal act of war against the sovereign hegemony. We demand you surrender immediately and submit to justice for your unprovoked aggression." Sarah stepped forward, her hands clasped behind her back in parade rest position. When she spoke, her voice carried the cold precision of someone who had spent years planning for this exact moment. "High Counselor, let me be very clear. You hanged one of our Marines on live television after he protected human children from your soldiers' target practice. That was your declaration of war, not ours. We're simply responding in kind. One soldier, one primitive soldier for protecting a few larvae. This response is completely disproportionate." "Actually," Sarah said, checking her tactical display, where red dots representing destroyed hegemony facilities were multiplying by the second, "I think it's perfectly proportionate. You see, Counselor, you made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because we submitted to your rule 50 years ago, we were a conquered people. But humans have a saying. We don't get mad, we get even." Vextharan's skin color shifted to a sickly yellow, a sign of fear in his species. "What do you want? We can negotiate terms, establish new treaties." "The time for negotiation ended when you put a rope around Marcus Cole's neck," Sarah replied. "But I'll tell you what's going to happen. Every human world you control will be liberated within the week. Every human soldier in your armies will be given the choice to come home or continue serving our new government. Every species you've conquered will be offered the same chance at freedom we're taking for ourselves. That's impossible. The hegemony controls over 200 species across 400 systems." Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Then you shouldn't have picked a fight with the species that conquered its own planet before it could even reach the stars. Humans wrote the book on warfare, Counselor. You just forgot to read it." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in relative silence. Around them, the displays showed human forces advancing on multiple fronts, each victory marked by another red dot on the tactical map. "Admiral," Commander Hayes said quietly, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 hegemony garrison commanders across the outer systems. They're requesting terms. Standard package, complete withdrawal of all hegemony personnel from human-controlled space, reparations for 50 years of occupation, and safe passage to whatever hole they want to crawl into, provided they go peacefully. And if they refuse?" Sarah looked back at the burning world below them, thinking of Marcus Cole standing on that gallows platform, thinking of every human child who'd grown up under alien rule, thinking of 50 years of submission and servitude finally coming to an end. Then they'll find out why the rest of the galaxy learned to fear the predator species from Sol system. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent her entire career studying alien biology, but nothing had prepared her for the sight before her. The medical bay of the UNS Retribution was filled with rescued human prisoners from hegemony detention facilities, each one a testament to alien cruelty and human endurance. Marcus Cole lay on the primary medical table, his body a map of calculated torture. The Vorthak had been methodical in their brutality, using their knowledge of human anatomy to inflict maximum pain without killing their prize captive. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency as her medical scanners revealed the full extent of the damage. Neural implant removed surgically, she murmured to her assistant, cataloging the wounds for the record. Looks like they wanted to make sure he couldn't activate any cybernetic enhancements during the execution. 3 ribs cracked, evidence of repeated electrical stimulation to the nervous system, and she paused, her jaw tightening. They removed sections of skin to study human pain responses. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, surprisingly alert for someone who'd endured 3 weeks of systematic torture. Doc, did we get them all? Rest, Sergeant. You're safe now. Admiral Chen's fleet has secured the system. Elena continued her examination, her medical training warring with her desire to comfort the wounded Marine. The neural blocks they installed are dissolving. You should have full motor function back within the hour. Good. I've got work to do. Elena looked up from her scanner. Sergeant Cole, with all due respect, you're in no condition for active duty. The trauma alone. Marcus tried to sit up, wincing as his injuries protested. Ma'am, you don't understand. This isn't over. The hegemony has been studying us for 50 years, documenting our weaknesses, cataloging our responses to different torture techniques. Everything they did to me was an experiment. What do you mean? They were preparing for a war they thought they'd win easily. They know exactly how much pain the average human can take before breaking, how long we can survive without food or water, how our social bonds can be exploited. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he spoke, the fire returning to his eyes. But they made one critical error in their research. Elena raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to continue. They studied average humans. Civilians, captured soldiers, colonists. They never bothered to study what happens when you really piss us off. Before Elena could respond, the medical bay doors opened and Admiral Chen walked in, her uniform bearing the scorch marks of recent combat. Behind her came a figure that made Marcus attempt to stand at attention despite his injuries. At ease, Marine, said General Patricia Morrison, the highest-ranking human officer in the galaxy. Her presence here, light years from Earth, spoke to the importance of what was happening. Sergeant Cole, I understand you have intelligence about hegemony operations. Marcus nodded, accepting Elena's help to sit upright. Yes, ma'am. During my interrogation, they showed me footage from other facilities. Human prisoners being used as test subjects for biological weapons, psychological manipulation techniques, something they called compliance conditioning designed to break human resistance permanently. Admiral Chen's expression darkened. Locations? At least 12 facilities that I saw, General. But there's more. Marcus paused, gathering his strength. They have detailed files on every human military unit, every piece of equipment we've developed, every tactical doctrine we've used in their service. They know exactly how we fight because we've been fighting their wars for 50 years. General Morrison exchanged a glance with Admiral Chen. That could complicate Phase 3 operations. Actually, ma'am, Marcus said, a grim smile crossing his face, I think it's about to become their biggest disadvantage. Through the medical bay's viewports, the lights of human warships could be seen maneuvering in formation, their movements precise and purposeful. Elena watched as Marcus struggled to his feet, his body protesting every movement but his will driving him forward. Sergeant, Elena said firmly, you need at least 48 hours of recovery time before you can even think about returning to duty. Marcus looked at her with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious. Doc, the hegemony just spent 3 weeks trying to break me. They used every technique in their playbook, every piece of data they'd collected about human psychology and physiology, and I'm still here. He gestured toward the view screen showing the rescued prisoners in the adjacent bay. Men and women who'd suffered months or years in hegemony custody, all of them alive, all of them unbroken despite everything their captors had done. They studied us like lab rats, thinking they could predict our behavior, control our responses, but they missed the most important thing about humans. Marcus walked slowly to the viewport, looking out at the fleet assembled beyond. We don't just survive. We adapt, we learn, we get stronger. Elena followed his gaze and saw what he was seeing. Each ship in the fleet represented thousands of humans who'd spent decades appearing to serve the hegemony, while secretly preparing for this moment. Engineers who'd built weapons disguised as civilian equipment. Scientists who'd developed new technologies under the pretense of improving hegemony designs. Soldiers who'd learned alien tactics by fighting alien wars, then improved on them. They think they know how we fight because they've seen us follow their orders, Marcus continued. But following orders and fighting for something you believe in are two completely different things. They're about to discover what humans are really capable of when we're fighting for our freedom instead of their expansion. General Morrison stepped forward. Sergeant, if you're feeling up to it, we could use your intelligence for Phase 3 planning. Your knowledge of hegemony detention facilities could save thousands of lives. Marcus straightened despite his injuries, every inch the Marine he'd been before his capture. Ma'am, with respect, I'd like to volunteer for something else. Oh? I want to lead the assault on their primary research facility, the place where they've been experimenting on my people. His voice carried the cold promise of retribution. They spent 3 weeks studying human pain tolerance. I'd like to return the favor. Elena opened her mouth to protest, but the look in Marcus's eyes stopped her. This wasn't the bravado of a wounded soldier trying to prove himself. This was something much more dangerous. A human being who'd been pushed beyond his breaking point and discovered he was stronger than anyone had imagined. The facility is heavily defended, Admiral Chen warned. Intelligence suggests at least 3 divisions of hegemony elite forces, plus automated defense systems designed specifically to counter human tactics. Marcus's smile was sharp and predatory. Perfect. I'd hate for it to be too easy. Through the medical bay speakers, the general quarters alarm began to sound. Elena watched as her patients, men and women who should have been broken by their experiences, began moving with purpose and determination. Each one was volunteering for active duty despite their injuries, despite what they'd endured. The hegemony had studied humans for 50 years, documented their weaknesses, cataloged their limits. But they'd made one crucial error in their research methodology. They'd studied humans in captivity, humans under control, humans who'd been beaten down and suppressed. They'd never studied free humans who had something worth fighting for. That oversight was about to cost them everything they'd built. Captain Zhang Wei crouched behind the twisted remains of a hegemony defense tower, listening to the distinctive whine of Vorthak energy weapons cutting through the air above his head. Around him, the ruins of Research Facility Omega-7 stretched like a metallic graveyard, its alien architecture now broken and burning under the assault of human forces. Movement. 2 o'clock, whispered Corporal Johnson, her rifle trained on the shadows between the facility's research blocks. Count 4 hostiles, heavy weapons. Zhang activated his tactical display, watching as friendly markers moved across the facility's layout. Marcus Cole's Special Operations Team was approaching the central research complex from the north, while Zhang's Marines held the perimeter and prevented any hegemony reinforcements from escaping with their research data. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Capture the facility intact, rescue any remaining human prisoners, and most importantly, secure 50 years' worth of research data that the hegemony had compiled about humanity. Information that would prove invaluable in the coming phases of what the brass was calling the Liberation War. Captain, came Marcus's voice through the comm system, distorted by interference from the facility's defensive fields. We're at the primary lab complex. Initial sweep shows approximately 30 human subjects in suspended animation. All appear to be alive. Zhang felt a surge of relief. Intelligence had suggested the facility held close to 100 human prisoners, but 30 survivors was 30 more than they'd dared hope for. Copy that, Sergeant. What's your status on the research data? Still working on it. These Vorthak computer systems are more complex than we anticipated. Looks like they've been collecting data on every aspect of human biology and psychology. Mental conditioning techniques, biological weapon testing, even genetic manipulation experiments. The words sent a chill down Zhang's spine. During the initial assault, his team had discovered laboratories filled with evidence of systematic experimentation on human subjects. The hegemony hadn't just been using humans as soldiers and laborers. They'd been treating them as laboratory specimens, testing the limits of human endurance in ways that violated every civilized norm of warfare. "Sir," Johnson called out, "we've got company." Zhang looked up to see a flight of hegemony atmosphere craft approaching from the east, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive purple and gold markings of the Vorthak Elite Guard. These weren't regular garrison troops. They were the hegemony's best soldiers, called in to prevent the facility from falling into human hands. "All units, this is Bravo 7. Zhang spoke into his communicator. "We have incoming elite guard forces. Looks like someone decided this facility was worth protecting." "Copy that, Captain," came Admiral Chen's voice from orbit. "Reinforcements are en route, but they're 15 minutes out." "Can you hold?" Zhang looked around at his Marines, men and women who'd volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive it. Each one had lost friends or family to hegemony brutality. Each one was here not just for military objectives, but for something much more personal. "Affirmative, Admiral. We'll hold." The first wave of Elite Guard soldiers came down like falling meteors, their personal armor systems allowing them to survive atmospheric entry without vehicles. Zhang watched as 30-foot-tall figures in powered exoskeletons crashed into the facility grounds, their weapons already charging for combat. "Remember," Zhang called to his team as they took defensive positions, "these aren't regular troops. Elite Guard have enhanced reflexes, energy shields, and weapons that can punch through a bunker wall. But they've never fought humans who had a choice in the matter." The battle was joined with the distinctive crack hiss of human kinetic weapons meeting hegemony energy shields. Zhang's Marines had learned to fight alien enemies by fighting alongside them for 50 years, studying their tactics and equipment while pretending to be loyal soldiers. Now that knowledge was being turned against its source. "Flank left," Zhang shouted as an Elite Guard soldier rounded the corner of a research building, its forearms wielding weapons that could have equipped an entire human squad. Johnson's rifle barked 3 times, each shot precisely targeted at the joints in the alien's exoskeleton where the armor was weakest. The giant figure stumbled, its shields flaring and overloading under the concentrated fire. Human weapons were primitive by hegemony standards, but they were designed for reliability and precision rather than overwhelming power. When used by soldiers who knew exactly where to hit, they were devastatingly effective. "Marcus, what's your status?" Zhang called between bursts of weapons fire. "Almost done here, Captain. The data archives are massive. Looks like they've been studying us since first contact. But I found something else." Marcus's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Detailed files on hegemony military capabilities, ship positions, even their plans for expansion into the Andromeda Galaxy. Zhang felt a moment of savage joy. The hegemony had been so confident in their ability to control humanity that they'd stored their most sensitive military intelligence in the same facility where they tortured human prisoners. It was an arrogance that would cost them dearly. "Heads up, everyone," Johnson called out. "We've got more incoming." Zhang looked up to see the distinctive energy signatures of hegemony dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace above the planet. Massive ships designed to crack continents and boil oceans, each one capable of reducing the entire facility to molten slag within minutes. For a moment, Zhang felt a flutter of doubt. They'd known this mission was dangerous, but facing dreadnought-class weapons seemed like suicide. Then he remembered the footage of Marcus Cole standing on that gallows platform, refusing to break even with death staring him in the face. "All units, this is Admiral Chen," came the transmission from orbit. "We see the dreadnoughts. Maintain positions and continue the mission. We're handling the naval engagement." Through the smoky atmosphere above them, Zhang could see the running lights of human warships moving to intercept the hegemony fleet. The space above the planet lit up with weapons fire, as humanity's hidden navy revealed just how much they'd learned about space combat during their years of servitude. "Data secured." Marcus's voice crackled through the comm. "All prisoners are stable and ready for extraction. But Captain, you need to see this. Kind of busy right now, Sergeant." "Sir, they weren't just experimenting on us. They were preparing for a war of extermination. Complete genetic profiles of every human population. Detailed plans for biological weapons designed to target specific human DNA sequences. Even psychological warfare techniques designed to turn human populations against each other." Zhang felt his blood run cold. The hegemony hadn't been content with conquest. They'd been planning genocide. Every human who'd ever served in their armies, every colonist who'd submitted to their rule, every child who'd grown up under alien occupation, had been marked for eventual elimination. Copy that, Marcus. How long until you can move? Ready now, sir. The prisoners are in portable suspension units. We can extract in 10 minutes. Around the facility, the elite guard was regrouping for another assault. Zhang could see them coordinating their attack patterns, bringing their superior firepower to bear on the human defensive positions. In space above, the battle between human and hegemony fleets was lighting up the planet's atmosphere with debris and weapons fire. All right, Marines, Zhang called to his team. We've got our people, we've got their data, and we've got about 10 minutes to get out of here before this place gets glassed from orbit. Anyone have any objections to making these purple bastards work for their victory? The answer came in the form of increased weapons fire, as his Marines doubled their efforts to hold the perimeter. These were humans fighting not just for military objectives, but for the right to exist without fear, without oppression, without the constant threat of alien experiments and alien control. The hegemony had spent 50 years studying human behavior under captivity. They were about to learn what humans were capable of when they were truly free. High Counselor Vexitharan stood in the emergency command center, buried deep beneath the hegemony's capital world, watching as red warning indicators cascaded across the tactical displays like digital blood. In 72 hours, humanity had destroyed or captured more hegemony territory than any enemy force in the past 3 centuries. Report, he demanded, his forearms trembling with barely controlled rage. Fleet Commander Zaxitel's skin had shifted to the pale green of deep stress. Sir, we've lost contact with 47 major installations across 16 systems. Human forces are advancing on 3 fronts simultaneously, and our garrison commanders are reporting coordinated uprisings on every world with significant human populations. Vexitharan felt his breathing sacs constrict. This was impossible. Humans were a primitive species, barely capable of interstellar travel when the hegemony had first encountered them. Their submission had been complete, their integration into hegemony society seamless. They'd served as soldiers and workers for 5 decades without a single major revolt. How many ships do they have? He asked, dreading the answer. Current estimates suggest over 300 active warships, sir, all of them using technology we've never seen before. That's impossible. We've monitored their industrial capacity for 50 years. They lack the infrastructure to build more than a dozen vessels without our knowledge. Zaxitel manipulated the holographic display, showing ship movement patterns across the galaxy. Sir, intelligence analysis suggests they've been building in secret for decades. Hidden shipyards, concealed mining operations, entire manufacturing complexes disguised as civilian infrastructure. We've been completely deceived. The words hit Vexitharan like physical blows. The hegemony's control was based on absolute information superiority. They monitored every species under their rule, tracked every resource allocation, supervised every technological development. The idea that humans had hidden an entire military-industrial complex from hegemony surveillance was unthinkable. What about their military capabilities? Our files indicate that human combat effectiveness is limited by their primitive weapons and tactical thinking. Sir, Zaxitel said quietly, those files appear to have been deliberately falsified. Human forces are demonstrating combat capabilities far beyond our projections. They're using tactics we've never encountered, weapons that seem specifically designed to counter our defensive systems, and coordination that suggests years of careful planning. On the main display, a new report flashed urgent red. Another star system had gone dark, its hegemony garrison either destroyed or forced to retreat. Vexitharan watched as the map of hegemony space slowly turned from purple to the bright blue that indicated human control. The research facility Omega-7, he said suddenly. Please tell me we destroyed it before evacuation. Zaxitel's skin color shifted to the sickly yellow of fear. Sir, the facility was captured intact. All research data, all prisoners, all experimental subjects were taken by human forces before our fleet could respond. Vexitharan's legs nearly gave out beneath him. Research Facility Omega-7 contained 50 years of detailed intelligence about human biology, psychology, and social structures. It held the complete genetic profiles of every human population, detailed studies of their military capabilities and, most critically, the plans for biological weapons specifically designed to exterminate the human species. In human hands, that information would be devastating, not just because it revealed hegemony intentions, but because it would allow humans to understand exactly how thoroughly they'd been studied and manipulated. "Sir," called Intelligence Coordinator Dex Maven from her station across the command center, "we're receiving reports from our subject species across the galaxy. The Caltharians have declared independence. The Nixari are in open revolt. Even the Sulathans are questioning hegemony authority." Vexitharan felt his world collapsing around him. The hegemony's power was built on the assumption that inferior species would always remain inferior, that technological superiority guaranteed perpetual dominance. Humans were proving that assumption fatally wrong. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Humans are weak, individualistic, prone to internal conflict. Our psychological profiles indicated they were incapable of sustained organized resistance." "Sir," Dex Maven said carefully, "it appears our psychological profiles were based on data from humans under extreme stress and captivity. We may have misunderstood their behavior patterns under normal conditions." The admission was like a knife to Vextharan's pride. The hegemony had conquered hundreds of species by understanding their psychology better than they understood themselves. The idea that they'd completely misread humanity was beyond humiliating. It was existentially threatening. "What about our defense pacts? Surely the Mordani Empire will assist us against this human uprising." Zaxital checked his communications board, his expression growing more desperate. "Sir, the Mordani are requesting detailed information about human capabilities before committing forces. The Veltharian Confederacy is demanding territorial concessions in exchange for military support. And the Quaraxian Syndicate," he paused. "The Quaraxians are offering to mediate a peace treaty." Vexitharan's breathing sacs inflated with rage. The hegemony's allies could sense weakness, and like the scavengers they'd always been, they were positioning themselves to benefit from its collapse. A new alarm began sounding, this one with the distinctive wail that indicated enemy forces approaching the capital system. Vexitharan looked up at the tactical display to see human warships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of Vorthak Prime's solar system. "Defense fleet status?" he asked weakly. 37 ships remaining in operational condition," Zaxital reported. "The humans are fielding approximately 60 vessels, including several we've classified as dreadnought equivalent. 60 ships against the hegemony's most heavily defended system." 3 weeks ago, Vextharan would have laughed at such odds. Now, given what he'd seen of human capabilities, he wasn't sure 60 ships wouldn't be enough. "Sir," Dex Maven called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting a direct communication link with you." Vexitharan straightened his ceremonial robes, trying to project an authority he no longer felt. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, showing the bridge of a human warship. At its center stood Admiral Sarah Chen, the woman who'd orchestrated the destruction of New Byzantium. Her uniform was spotless, her expression calm, her bearing that of someone completely confident in her position. "High Counselor," she said without preamble, "I believe we need to talk." "Admiral Chen," Vextharan replied, fighting to keep his voice steady, "you've committed acts of war against the sovereign hegemony. We demand your immediate surrender and the return of all stolen property." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "High Counselor, let me clarify the situation for you. In the past 72 hours, human forces have liberated 43 star systems, rescued over 10,000 human prisoners, and captured detailed records of hegemony war crimes spanning 5 decades. We're not here to negotiate our surrender. We're here to discuss yours." The words hit the command center like a physical force. Around Vexitharan, his staff exchanged glances of barely concealed panic. The idea that the hegemony, the greatest military power in galactic history, would surrender to a species they'd considered primitive was unthinkable. "Impossible," Vexitharan said. "We have allies, resources, weapons you cannot imagine." "Had," Admiral Chen corrected. "Your allies are abandoning you. Your resources are under our control, and your weapons—" She smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Vexitharan had ever seen. "Well, let's just say that 50 years of forced service taught us everything we needed to know about your weapons." Around the command center, the warning alarms continued their desperate wail. announcing the approach of human forces that had learned to be far more dangerous than their former masters had ever imagined. President Maria Santos stood before the assembled representatives of 47 alien species in what had once been the Hegemony High Council chambers. The massive amphitheater carved from living crystal still bore scorch marks from the brief battle that had taken Vorthak Prime. But the real changes were less visible and more profound. Where purple and gold hegemony banners had hung for centuries, the simple blue and white flag of Earth now dominated the chamber. Where alien overlords had once decided the fate of hundreds of worlds, representatives of formerly enslaved species now gathered to determine their own futures. 3 months ago, President Santos began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems. Humanity was a vassal species serving the hegemony's expansion across the galaxy. Today we stand here as free beings, and more importantly, we stand here together. The applause was tentative at first, then building as delegates from dozens of species joined in. The Caltharian representative, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights, rose to speak. "The humans did something none of us thought possible," she said, her translated words carrying the harmonic undertones of her species' natural communication. "They reminded us that freedom is worth fighting for, no matter how impossible victory might seem." Marcus Cole, now wearing the uniform of a colonel in the newly formed Galactic Liberation Forces, stood at attention near the speaker's podium. His presence here was symbolic. The Marine who'd refused to break under torture had become a rallying point for resistance movements across the galaxy. "Colonel Cole," President Santos called, "would you please share your observations about hegemony capabilities during your captivity?" Marcus stepped forward, his bearing still that of a combat veteran despite his new diplomatic role. "Thank you, Madam President. What I learned during my interrogation was that the hegemony's greatest weakness was also their greatest strength, their absolute confidence in their own superiority." He activated a holographic display showing the intelligence, data captured from Research Facility Omega-7. The assembled delegates leaned forward as detailed files appeared, documenting centuries of hegemony expansion and subjugation. They studied every species they conquered, Marcus continued, documenting weaknesses, cataloging responses to different forms of control, developing customized suppression techniques for each population. But they made one critical error in their methodology, which was, asked the Nexari delegate, his scaled features showing intense interest. They studied conquered peoples, not free ones. Every piece of data they collected was tainted by the conditions of their collection. They knew how humans behaved under occupation, but they never understood how we behaved when we had something worth fighting for. Admiral Chen, now serving as Secretary of Defense for the Provisional Galactic Government, stood to address the assembly. "The intelligence we captured has revealed something else equally important. The hegemony wasn't just controlling subject species. They were preparing to eliminate many of them, entirely." The chamber fell silent as she displayed files showing genetic modification projects designed to make certain species more compliant, biological weapons targeted at specific DNA sequences, and long-term plans for what the hegemony had euphemistically called population optimization. Every species in this room was scheduled for eventual elimination, Admiral Chen said flatly. The hegemony viewed biological diversity as inefficient. Their long-term goal was a galaxy populated entirely by species that served their specific needs, with all others removed from existence. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Species that had served the hegemony faithfully for centuries discovered that their loyalty had been rewarded with plans for their destruction. "This is why," President Santos continued, "we're proposing not just an alliance against the remaining hegemony forces, but a new form of galactic government based on principles of self-determination and mutual cooperation." The Solithan delegate, her insectoid features rigid with barely controlled emotion, spoke for the first time. "The humans could have chosen to become the new hegemony. Your military capabilities clearly exceed theirs. Why offer partnership instead of demanding submission?" Marcus answered before President Santos could speak. "Because we've seen what happens when one species decides it knows what's best for everyone else. We fought this war to be free, not to become new oppressors. The galaxy has room for all of us, if we're willing to share it." The discussion that followed was heated but constructive. Species that had never been allowed to speak for themselves suddenly had voices in their own governance. The Caltharians proposed a mutual defense pact. The Nexari offered to share their advanced terraforming technology. Even the traditionally isolationist Veltharians expressed interest in cultural exchange programs. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now heading the Interspecies Medical Cooperation Council, presented her own findings. The research facilities we've liberated have given us incredible insights into the biology and psychology of dozens of species. This information, shared freely instead of used for control, could revolutionize medical care across the galaxy. What about the remaining hegemony forces? Asked the Mordani representative, his features showing the stress patterns his species displayed when discussing military threats. Admiral Chen activated a new display showing the current tactical situation. Approximately 30% of former hegemony space remains under their control, primarily in systems with low populations of subject species. Our intelligence indicates they're attempting to regroup around their core worlds. They still have significant military assets. General Morrison added via holographic link from her command ship. 3 major fleets, several fortress worlds, and what our analysts believe are experimental weapons projects designed to counter human tactics. President Santos nodded grimly. Which brings us to the most important question before this assembly. The Liberation War isn't over. The hegemony still exists, still threatens free peoples across the galaxy, and still possesses the capability to reconquer everything we've achieved here. Do we face that threat together, or do we allow them to pick us off individually? The vote, when it came, was unanimous. 47 species that had once served as unwilling vassals in the hegemony's expansion now stood together as equal partners in their own defense. Marcus looked out at the assembled delegates, thinking about the path that had brought them here. It had started with one Marine refusing to break under torture, escalated to a coordinated human uprising that shattered centuries of alien dominance, and culminated in something unprecedented in galactic history. A voluntary alliance of free species united by shared principles rather than common subjugation. There's one more thing, Marcus said as the session was winding down. The hegemony spent 50 years studying human behavior, documenting our responses to their control. They know exactly how we think, how we fight, how we can be manipulated. The chamber grew quiet, delegates wondering if this was some form of warning about future vulnerability. But there's something they never studied, Marcus continued with a slight smile. They never studied what happens when humans have friends worth fighting for, allies worth protecting, and a cause bigger than themselves. They're about to discover that free humans fighting alongside free allies are a very different enemy than enslaved humans fighting their wars. The applause that followed wasn't polite diplomatic acknowledgement. It was the sound of species that had forgotten what hope sounded like, rediscovering their voices and their will to fight for something better than mere survival. The galaxy was about to learn that freedom, once awakened, was impossible to destroy. The final battle for galactic freedom began at dawn over Hegemony Prime, the ancient homeworld of the Vorthax species, and the last major stronghold of the failing empire. Colonel Marcus Cole stood on the observation deck of the UNS Liberation, watching as the combined fleets of 47 free species moved into attack formation against the most heavily defended world in galactic history. All units. "This is Admiral Chen," came the voice over the fleet communications network. "Today we end 5 centuries of hegemony oppression, not just for humanity, not just for any single species, but for the principle that free beings have the right to determine their own destinies." Marcus activated his tactical display, watching as thousands of ships from dozens of different species coordinated their movements with precision that would have been impossible under the old hegemony command structure. Caltharian crystal ships moved in perfect harmony with human destroyers, while Nexari bioships provided support for Sulathan strike wings. What had once been a collection of enslaved vassals had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a truly integrated galactic military force, united by choice rather than conquest. "Colonel," came the voice of Captain Zhang Wei from the Marine assault craft Bay of Pigs. "First wave is ready for deployment. All Liberation forces report ready for Operation Final Dawn." Marcus looked down at the planet below, its purple and gold cities still gleaming with the arrogance of centuries of unchallenged dominance. Somewhere down there, High Counselor Vextherin and the remnants of the Hegemony High Council were making their final stand in the fortress complex that had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species could remember. Copy that, Captain. Remember, this isn't a war of conquest. We're here to liberate the remaining enslaved populations and capture the Hegemony leadership for war crimes trials. No unnecessary destruction, no retribution against civilians. Understood, sir. Though I have to say, after seeing what they did to our people in those research facilities, it's taking considerable discipline to maintain that position. Marcus understood the sentiment completely. The intelligence data captured from Hegemony research stations had revealed atrocities beyond imagination. Systematic torture, biological experimentation, genetic manipulation programs designed to make subject species more docile and compliant. Every human in the liberation forces had friends or family members who'd suffered under Hegemony rule, and the desire for revenge was a constant undercurrent in their conversations. But revenge, Marcus knew, was exactly what would turn liberators into the next generation of oppressors. The galaxy had seen enough cycles of conquest and subjugation. It was time to try something different. All fighters commence Phase 1, Admiral Chen announced. The sky around Hegemony Prime lit up with weapons fire as human and allied ships engaged the planet's orbital defense platforms. Marcus watched through his viewscreen as structures that had seemed invulnerable for centuries began to crack and burn under coordinated assault. The Hegemony had made their defenses assuming they'd always face the same kind of enemies. They'd always fought, technologically, inferior species using familiar tactics with predictable strategies. They'd never planned for an enemy that combined the technological innovations of 47 different civilizations with human tactical flexibility and alien strategic thinking. Colonel Cole to all ground forces, Marcus announced as the first wave of landing craft launched from the fleet. We have confirmed intelligence that the Hegemony is holding approximately 50,000 prisoners from various species in the detention complexes beneath the capital city. Priority 1 is securing those facilities and getting our people out safely. The descent through Hegemony Prime's atmosphere was surreal. Marcus could see Vorthak's civilians in the streets below, their purple faces turned skyward in expressions of shock and disbelief. Many of them had probably never imagined that their world could be threatened, that their empire could be challenged, that their superiority could ever be questioned. "Sir," called Sergeant Wilson from the pilot station, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 different Hegemony garrison commanders. Looks like they'd rather give up than face us in ground combat." "Standard response," Marcus replied. "Immediate cessation of hostilities. Secure all prisoners for release. Provide detailed intelligence about remaining loyalist forces. Anyone who cooperates will receive fair treatment under galactic law." Through the landing craft's viewports, Marcus could see other elements of the Liberation Fleet engaging remaining Hegemony forces across the planet's surface. But the real resistance was crumbling faster than anyone had anticipated. Centuries of absolute dominance had made the Hegemony psychologically unprepared for facing an enemy that was both technologically competent and strategically innovative. "Touchdown in 30 seconds, Wilson announced. "Welcome to Hegemony Prime, sir. Hopefully our last stop in this war." Marcus checked his equipment one final time as the landing craft settled onto the crystalline plaza outside the Hegemony High Council chambers. Through the tactical network, he could see liberation forces deploying across the planet's surface, each team heading for predetermined objectives that would decapitate the Hegemony command structure while minimizing casualties among civilian populations. The assault on the High Council chambers was almost anticlimactic. The legendary Vorthak Elite Guard, the most feared soldiers in galactic history, surrendered after a brief firefight that demonstrated their equipment and training were no match for humans who'd learned their tactics by fighting alongside them for 50 years. Marcus found High Counselor Vextherin in the Emergency Command Center, surrounded by dead communication equipment and tactical displays showing the complete collapse of Hegemony resistance across the galaxy. The alien leader looked smaller than he had during their previous encounters, his forearms trembling with what Marcus recognized as the physiological signs of Vorthak defeat submission. "High Counselor," Marcus said formally, "I'm placing you under arrest for crimes against sentient beings, including systematic torture, biological experimentation, and plans for species-wide genocide. You'll be transported to Earth for trial by an interspecies tribunal. Vexitharan looked up with eyes that held no fight left in them. How? He asked simply. How did your primitive species accomplish what no civilization in galactic history has ever achieved? Marcus considered the question seriously. It deserved a thoughtful answer, not just because Vexitharan had asked, but because the answer would become part of the historical record of this moment. You made the same mistake that every empire makes eventually, Marcus said. You assumed that your way of thinking was the only way of thinking, that your values were universal values, that your strength made you superior to everyone else. But most importantly, you forgot that free beings will always be stronger than enslaved ones when they're fighting for something they believe in. He gestured toward the view screen showing human and allied forces working together across the planet's surface, liberating prisoners, securing facilities, providing aid to civilian populations regardless of species. You studied us for 50 years, documented our weaknesses, cataloged our limitations, but you never understood our greatest strength. When we choose to stand together, we become something greater than the sum of our parts. You tried to use that strength for your own purposes, but you never comprehended what it could accomplish when it was truly free. 6 hours later, the last hegemony stronghold had fallen. The war for galactic liberation was over. Marcus stood in the same plaza where Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Cole had faced execution just 4 months earlier, watching as freed prisoners from dozens of species embraced their liberators. Children who'd been held as research subjects were reunited with families who'd thought them dead. Soldiers who'd been forced to fight for their oppressors were finally free to choose their own battles. Colonel, came Admiral Chen's voice over his communicator, President Santos is requesting your presence for the signing ceremony. Something about the historical significance of having the war's first casualty witness its conclusion. Marcus looked around at the scene. Before him, species that had been enemies for centuries working side by side, former slaves becoming equals, a galaxy finally learning what peace between free peoples could look like. Tell the president I'll be honored to attend, he said. But first I have a promise to keep. He activated his personal communicator and sent a message to Earth, to a small apartment where a woman and her daughter had waited 4 months for news they'd almost stopped hoping to receive. Sarah, Jenny, Marcus said, knowing his words would take days to reach Earth but needing to send them anyway. I'm coming home, and this time nobody's going to stop me. The age of hegemony domination was over. The age of galactic cooperation was about to begin. And at its foundation was a simple truth that had taken 5 centuries and a war spanning hundreds of worlds to prove. Free beings, standing together by choice, were stronger than any empire built on conquest and fear. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to fight for freedom. Now they would all learn together how to live with it.